Hey everybody, how's it going? Great to see you guys. Can everybody hear me? Hello? Hello? Testing? Testing? Hey, can you guys hear me? Just making sure everything's good. All right, good stuff. Good stuff. So, one question off the top from random comment. Where was the debate? The debate was only aired in French on TVA Nouvelle. It's basically one of the French only news channels in Quebec. It was aired live from 8 to 10 Eastern. And it will be shown on CPAC, I think sometime tonight, and it'll be available on demand. And CPAC will run it with translation, but there was no simultaneous translation. So if you were only able to understand in English, you have to wait till after the debate. This is because it wasn't one of the official debates. The two official debates are, next week. There's the official French and official English debate, and those will be translated simultaneously. The private debates, whether it was the Maclean's debate or this one, they have no such obligation. I don't even know if the Maclean's one was translated at all, but certainly this one will be translated later on. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this is that there are some people who don't speak French or don't speak it very well. And I do have at least something of a French proficiency, at least as it comes to absorbing media, reading and listening. And I wanted to kind of cover this debate. Hey to everybody here. Great to see you. Somebody says here at CPAC at 10:30, don't leave the stream. Stick with me, but it'll be available on CPAC probably to stream on demand over the next couple days. So certainly check that out. Somebody's like, y'all better smash the like button. Thanks, Comrade Internet. Brianna won't be joining tonight because we are starting later. Brianna had a long day today, and so knowing that we'll probably go till 11:30 or 12 or so, wasn't able to participate. So we won't have Brianna's moderating skills, but it will be good to just chat with you guys and have a bit of a discussion. So I won't take questions right away, because I want to kind of give a few remarks. So the way the debate worked, for those who didn't watch it, is it was four people. There was Singh from the NDP, Trudeau from the Liberals, Scheer from the Conservatives, and Blanchet from the Bloc. The criteria for who was invited to this one, and because it's just a news channel, they don't have to have like officially approved criterion and things like that, was basically, has that party won a seat in Quebec? So Elizabeth May was excluded because the Greens have never won a seat in Quebec. And Maxime Bernier was excluded, presumably because while he does hold a Quebec seat, it was not won as the PPC. So, the PPC and Greens weren't included. So it includes the four parties that won seats in the last election in Quebec. And they sort of did a face-to-face format. It was called face à face, basically. So there would be questions, and they would be sort of marked as a mini debate between two of the leaders. So for a question, it would be Blanchet versus Trudeau, and then Scheer versus Singh, and then Singh versus Trudeau, and then Blanchet versus Scheer, and what have you. But it would give opportunities for other leaders to jump in. And I thought the format was pretty good. It limited the kind of free-for-all interrupt fest. And we saw a bit of that in the Maclean's debate, and that was only three people on the stage. That was just May, Scheer, and Singh. This was four people, and so you can imagine that there's a greater opportunity for a lot of crosstalk to happen that makes it very hard to follow. So I thought the format was pretty good. In terms of performance, I thought Scheer did not have a good night. His French is the weakest of the four, and I'm not judging it solely based on that, although, a lack of proficiency in the language makes you more wooden, makes you less able to pivot, makes you more dependent on sticking to your talking points because you don't want to make a mistake with the language, right? And I felt Scheer came off quite poorly. And it's hard for Scheer because, again, his views are objectively unpopular in much of Quebec, at least most of them are. And so it's very hard to say defend pipelines, and it's very hard to defend, programs like that in a province where those things, aren't supported. I thought that Trudeau did not have a bad night, but I did notice that whenever he sort of got backed into a corner, he responded very aggressively. He was almost yelling, and I didn't think that was very becoming. So, for instance, when Singh rightfully criticized him for his softness on Trump, I felt that there was really he was like, well, we've done so much on this and that. And he was very angry, and not angry in the sense that like, this is a man who clearly feels he's been wronged, but it's like thou doth, protest too much. And like, he's trying to cover up the fact that Singh has him dead to rights. And so I'm just going to be angry. And so whether it was on him being soft on Trump or whether it was on him, not following through on his environmental promises, I felt Singh held him to account quite well. I thought Singh had a good night as well. I thought a lot of Quebecers don't know him, and there's a lot of misconceptions about Jagmeet Singh in Quebec, what he is, what he believes, all of those things. We saw an example of that this afternoon, where Singh was basically told, like, oh, if you take off your turban, you'll look more Canadian. Those views are common in a lot of places in Canada, but in Quebec, with Bill 21 and things like that, it seems pretty common, right? Like, it seems like it's maybe a little bit more open right now. And I think in some ways, it was good for Singh to introduce himself to people. And so I thought he had a good night. And I thought he hammered his key points home. Same ones as in English as in French, which was basically like, Trudeau and Scheer are there for the rich, and I'm here for you. We need pharmacare and dental care, and not, and taxing the rich, and not big handouts to corporations and the wealthy. We need to stand up to Trump, not kowtow to him, and on and on and on. And I thought it was good. And Blanchet probably had the best night of them all, the bloc leader, if I'm being 100% objective. And that's because his mastery of French is the best on the stage. But also, these debates are always easiest for the Bloc Québécois leader because he only has to consider what Quebec wants. If there's an issue where Quebec and the rest of Canada disagree, or there's an issue where it's not even all of rest of Canada, but there's an issue that, say, your key constituency in English Canada disagrees with, but the voters you want in Quebec agree with something, you have to navigate that very carefully. Do I anger my Anglophone voters, or do I anger my Francophone Quebecois voters? Do I hope to say one thing in French and hope that my English supporters won't hear me, or do I just embrace the fact that I'm going to say different things to different people? The Bloc leader doesn't need to worry about that. He can just run on Quebec issues. So, for instance, he could take a strong pro-Bill 21 stance because he knows that the majority of Quebecers and the majority of people who would consider voting for the Bloc support Bill 21. So he can take it's easy for him. The other leaders have to be careful. They have to take a stand against it, but then also not take such a stand against it that it looks like they're violating Quebec's autonomy. Much more complicated. And so I think a strong performance by him, combined with the easier setup, gave him a good performance and gave him the potential, and he seized it. Dan, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, I saw that part of the clip cut off, but I didn't notice till after the video was made and in my editing queue. I don't know if that changes anything, to be honest. I mean, I see your point, but I feel like if any, the point is not that this guy is an NDP supporter or any other party supporter. It's the assumption that if you look a certain way, you don't look Canadian, or that, when in Rome, do like the Romans do. And I think Singh's answer was very much like, well, no, you're in Canada. You can do what you're like. You can do what you like. And in Canada, what looks like a Canadian is what a Canadian is. I mean, like, there is no looks like a Canadian, right? And so I think that was the point. And whether or not he's a supporter or an opposer, I think in some ways it doesn't matter in that case. And I understand the perspective, but I feel it's irrelevant in this particular case. I mean, Brandon asks, who does the Bloc eat? I would say probably the Conservatives and the NDP more than the Liberals. At least it depends. The core Liberal seats are in Anglophone Montreal, and those aren't touched by the Bloc at all. But if the Liberals want to run the table in Quebec, they do need to go through the Bloc. And I think that one of the positives for us as NDP supporters, at least I am, and a lot of my viewers are, of course, is that, the Bloc being strong makes it harder for the NDP. That's true. But the Bloc being strong makes it harder for Justin Trudeau to mop up Quebec seats, and that makes it harder for Trudeau to win a majority. It's not impossible, of course, but a strong Bloc makes a Liberal majority, much harder, right? So it really depends. I mean, the NDP had strength in Montreal, but also in certain rural and semi-rural areas that have been historically Bloc seats. That's where the Orange Wave happened. They also, but the Montreal core is often Liberal, the Anglophone Montreal. The Quebec conservative core is largely in and around Quebec City. And I would think that the Bloc is stronger there than any other party except for the Conservatives. So a very strong Bloc would menace the Conservatives and Liberals in certain parts. But that's where we're at right now. And I think the Bloc, where they are picking up gains, it'll be predominantly from the NDP. At least that's what the numbers look like. It's hard to say exactly, without a seat-by-seat breakdown, but that's probably what we're looking at there. Omar asks, could the Liberals or Blocs, or Liberals or Conservatives form a coalition with the Bloc? I mean, under our system, you can form, any two parties or more parties can form a coalition. There's no rule against it. But including the Bloc in a coalition is always very fraught because they're they're the separatist party, quote unquote. And whether or not, you personally have an issue with that, there's often this narrative that the Bloc is sort of like against Canada. And so working with them in government is often seen as a really dangerous. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't, do a supply and confidence with the Bloc, at least informally, where let's say Andrew Scheer ends up 10 seats short of a majority, and the Bloc wins 15 seats in this election. That's not impossible, that outcome. That's a potential outcome. Andrew Scheer could, if he gave some concessions to Quebec on autonomy, on climate, what have you, basically saying, look, I'm not going to do any energy east. I'm going to give you some more money for this and that. Then the Bloc might be willing to prop him up in exchange for that. And so it won't be a coalition, but it would give Scheer the ability to govern, at least in the short term. And the Bloc would keep up that arrangement as long as they felt they benefit. But when we've had coalition talks, the Bloc's never really been a part of it. If you recall 2008, the NDP and the Liberals were going to form an actual coalition. Like there was going to be a shared cabinet where the Liberals would be the governing party mainly because they were the bigger party at the time in 2008, but the NDP would gain some seats in the cabinet. The Bloc would not be a formal coalition partner, but would vote to give that coalition the balance of power. Basically, the NDP and Liberals would form a government, and then the Bloc would vote with that government to defeat Andrew Scheer. That would be the objective. Or not Andrew Scheer, excuse me, Stephen Harper. But the Bloc was never part of it. But even still, the narrative from Harper was the Liberals are forming a coalition with socialists, aka the NDP, and separatists. And it was like that was one of the attacks he used to denounce it. I mean, the Great Dominion says Scheer did everything he needed to do to win at least a minority government. I'm not so sure. Scheer, I don't think, had a strong performance tonight. I don't know if Scheer gets Quebec. I don't know. I don't think he had a strong performance tonight. And the big question for Scheer, the biggest question of all right now, is vote distribution. And it's very clear that Scheer is winning the popular vote. Sort of in a reversal of 2016, where Clinton won the popular vote and lost it. The left won the left, Clinton, the center, right. But like the Democrats won the popular vote and lost the election. Scheer could do the same this time because he's running up a huge, huge surplus in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And that's great, but it's meaningless to win Fort McMurray by 82% versus 78%. It's literally meaningless. It means nothing. if you're going to lose by big amounts in Quebec and Ontario. And so that's why some people are projecting that even though the Liberals are losing, that they are clearly in the winning position in seats and may even win a majority while finishing second in the vote total. And now I don't know if the Liberals are at a majority. I don't think they are, but I do think it's a clear consensus right now. The Conservatives have more votes than any other party, but the Liberals have more seats than any other party. And I don't know if tonight changed that. You know, the core Conservative base, I don't think Scheer lost them, but I don't think he grew at all tonight. Yeah, Simon, you say, yeah, that point that the Bloc, I get that sense too, that the Bloc leader had a strong performance. And I think that, you know, the Bloc likely will, with a good performance tonight, likely preserves party status and things like that. And so unless he has a really bad performance in the next French debate next week, you know, I think he set himself up quite well. Okay, so because I'm doing this on my own this time, if I do miss a question, don't take offense to it. If it's been a few minutes, just throw it down at the bottom. I'll try to get to it. Dan, you ask if the Bloc is Quebec only, then how the F are they federal and provincial? Shouldn't they only be provincial? Well, the way it works is there's actually two different parties, and they're distinct. There's the Parti Québécois, and they are a provincial, you know, sovereigntist party, right? And they've existed since the 1970s. They formed government in Quebec a few times. You know, the party founded by René Lévesque. But for a long time, until I think it was the early 1990s, maybe the late 80s, somebody can correct me, there was no separatist party federally. And so at that time, there was the Bloc Québécois, which was formed as a federal party that would only seek seats in Quebec to represent Quebec issues at the federal level. And so those are distinct parties with, you know, and they're not connected. So, you know, that's how it's always been. And that Bloc, you know, sometimes they're very strong in Quebec. Often they win the most seats in Quebec. Even at one point, I believe they formed official opposition. They were the second biggest party in Canada during one of those big Liberal majorities, where the Liberals won most seats outside of Canada, but the Bloc was very strong outside of Quebec, but the Bloc was strong in Quebec. Craig makes a good point that, you know, Scheer's not likely to form a government if he doesn't win the most seats. I mean, I agree, but it's also the case that the Liberals might rather lose than share power with the NDP or Greens. We don't know. It's actually quite like, I mean, in our system, we have to make the point to people that the party with the most seats does not have the God or like the divine right to rule. Like, that's not how our system should work. It's the party that can command confidence in the House. And whether that's because they have the most seats or whether it's because they can work with other parties to build a, you know, a coalition, that's who should govern. But, you know, if Scheer gets to say 160, the Liberals are at 150, and then it's like, well, you know, does Trudeau want to form a coalition with the NDP? Does he want to? Would he rather give power to Scheer than share power with the NDP? And that's a question to answer, right? I mean, look, in 2008, there was the opportunity to form the coalition, and the NDP was in, and under Stéphane Dion, the Liberals were in as well. But what happened, as we all know, is Michael Ignatieff became Liberal leader, and then they backed down from the coalition idea, and they let Harper stay in power. You know, and so Justin Trudeau might be perfectly happy to make Andrew Scheer prime minister before, say, giving Jagmeet Singh what he wants, which is pharmacare and dental care and electoral reform. That might well be the case. We can't know. So Scheer can form a government without a majority if the other parties aren't willing to work together. I mean, the Great Dominion, you say strong Bloc and NDP/Green showing in the right places will help the CPC win more seats. I mean, potentially. That is potentially the case. Although the opposite is the opposite could be true as well. That you know, strong Green performances in certain NDP ridings could flip them to the Liberals, or, you know, what have you. It's really hard to predict how vote totals will happen in Quebec, and we don't even know how this debate will influence things. Does Elizabeth May's numbers fall because she wasn't included, and what have you? Does any of the does the bloc see like a 5% gain, and how does that affect things? Where does that gain happen? Is it in conservative areas or liberal areas or NDP areas? Like, we don't know. Like, it's too hard to predict in a province where 5 parties are potentially polling above 10%. Somebody asked, why does it appear that Singh is not as strong on fighting Bill 21? I mean, Bill 21 is interesting. I think Singh is taking the right tone. Look, Bill 21 is a racist piece of legislation. It really is. Like, and Singh has said it's state-sponsored discrimination. The point is, however, that it's duly passed legislation. And so the courts can overrule it based on the fact that it violates the charter rights. And I think what Singh is saying is, right now the point is that there's a legal process going on, and we should respect that legal process. And I think that's for now the right tone, which is that this is clearly charter violating legislation from our perspective, but we have to let the legislation play out. I think that's the right balance to take, because as of right now, at least, it's duly passed legislation from a provincial legislature, and I think it's tricky to go beyond that. Somebody said, like, how can you watch the debate again? It might be on the TVA website. They might like just have it there for on demand. If you want to hear it on English, it'll be on CPAC later, where they'll have like a translation. If you watched it originally, there was no English translation. It was only available in French. Lisa asks, what were the topics? I mean, there was no topic. It wasn't like the McLean's debate where there was like section topics. They talked about a whole bunch of things. They talked about Bill 21, immigration, Indigenous issues, climate, taxes. It was more of a grab bag. It was more like, here are some like questions. They hit on many of the big issues, rather than have like a sustained, chapter 1 is energy, and chapter 2 is foreign policy, and chapter 3 is healthcare, and on and on and on. It was less segmented like that. Somebody asked, how did Trudeau do, Philip Rottingham? I mean, Trudeau did okay. I mean, he did okay. Again, I felt that when he got backed into a corner, he started basically yelling into the microphone and being very aggressive, fast talking. I thought it came off as very defensive rather than assertive. And I don't think that came off well, but I don't think he blew it tonight, at least not from my perspective. I felt Scheer had a bad night, but I don't think any leader had a monumental collapse tonight. That's my view. Marc Andre says Bloc is very much an aging demographic, mostly in regions outside of Montreal. I mean, yeah, that's a great point. I wonder if having a younger leader will be helpful. Chantal Hébert noted on Twitter that this is the first time since 1997, I believe, that the Bloc has been represented by somebody other than Gilles Duceppe on a national debate. And so it could be the case that having a relatively young leader could help with that. But you're right that the Bloc does have a demographic challenge. Somebody asked, do you hear about the concerns regarding Autism Speak supporting the NDP platform? No, I haven't. I haven't heard about the particular controversy. I know that there's controversy around that organization, versus organizations that include autistic people in a more organic way and are run by them. But I am not an expert on those particular organizational debates, and as such, don't want to comment on them because I have no knowledge of them. But I'm not sure to what that refers. Dan asks, was climate change discussed in the debate? Yes, it was. It was. For a long time, Singh was the only one to bring up the climate strike. Singh challenged both Scheer and Trudeau on climate, saying that Scheer, wants to build an Energy East pipeline, which goes against the will of Quebecers, and saying that, Justin Trudeau has not done nearly enough to address climate change, that he's ignored the will of the youth and he's ignored the will of Indigenous people. The Bloc Québécois leader also brought up climate change, suggesting that, Andrew Scheer has no plan for transition. Justin Trudeau tried to defend his record very passionately, but Justin Trudeau forgot that it was him who was protesting his own climate plan last week. So I felt Trudeau was, again, a bit disingenuous on the issue. I thought, at least. I don't think he came off as very credible because, again, he was protesting himself last week. Guillaume with a very generous super chat donation. He basically says, I did not see the debate. It says that the NPD, which is the NDP in French, Parti Nouveau Parti Démocratique, says that the reasonable voice of the debate, keep up the good work. I would say that's a reasonable take. The NDP and the Bloc have similar views on some issues, but very different views on the other. So it's always interesting to have those discussions. They have some similar support for social programs, although the federalist versus decentralist approaches exist. But on some issues like Bill 21 and on the role on how you express secularism, they are very different. So it was a super interesting discussion, although they do in some cases compete for voters. So yeah, Guillaume, thanks again for the donation. I very much appreciate that. Comrade Internet, I encourage you to chat with people from A4A. Yeah, I'll certainly look into that. Again, I don't know a whole lot. I've seen some stuff on the internet. I have a general gist, but especially talking about disability and neurotypicality and neuroatypicality. Like, I don't want to wade into discussions that I'm not part of without any kind of expertise. But I certainly will look into that. Adam says, how are we doing tonight, beautiful comrades? Adam, I'm doing great. Hopefully everybody else in the chat's doing great. It's great for all you guys to join. Again, thanks for joining me later tonight. Normally we do this from 8 to 10 every Wednesday, at least until the election's over, and then we'll reevaluate whether we stay weekly or go bi-weekly again. But it's great to have you all here for this later stream. And I think this is a first. I'm going to say it before it changes, but I think for the first time ever, we've hit 100 concurrent people. We're at 101 right now, and it just went down to 98. God damn it. Okay, but we captured that. We were at 101 for a little bit, which is pretty exciting. Joshua noticed it too. Thank you so much. Adam noticed it too. Okay, great stuff. So we were at 100 people. We're down a whole lot from there, but great to have you all here. We're going to continue the discussion. Phil asks, yeah, it took Jack Layton a few times to break through. Yeah, it did. I mean, Jack Layton became leader in 2003, if we don't forget, and he did improve every time, although he started from a lower floor, of course. He started with very few seats. But Jack Layton took a long time to get any sort of traction in Quebec or outside of it. And so, it can be tricky to become a new leader at the federal stage, having no experience at the federal stage. I mean, Layton was a city councilor and went from city council level to the federal leadership. Singh, of course, had a bit more of a role. He's a provincial MPP here in Ontario, but it does take time to situate yourself potentially. CCN asks, who won the debate? I mean, I don't know. It's a hard question. Again, I think that the Bloc leader had a great night, but it's a hard question to answer because, again, as I noted, the Bloc leader can kind of just okay, here's what Quebec wants, and I can just say that. The other leaders can't do that, at least not 100%, because they got to be cognizant of the fact that Quebec and English Canada disagree. That Quebec and the rest of Canada, they disagree on certain things, right? So, on Bill 21, you got to be against it, but you can't be against Quebec's right to pass the law. That seems to be the line you have to draw. It's like, or you got to be for Singh, it's easy because he's anti-pipeline, but for the anti-pipeline or pro-pipeline politicians, you got to be pro-pipeline, but less pro-pipeline than if the debate was happening in, say, Calgary. And so it's a real tricky thing. Bloc Québécois leader didn't have to do that. And so I thought because of that, and because he did have a good performance, he probably won the night. Marc Andre says that the signing of the charter without Quebec's involvement was a spark to separatism. I think you're right, because as we remember, the first round of separatism, the first referendum wasn't all that close, and that was before the charter. And then, as we know, the second round, about a decade and a half later, almost it was effectively a tie. And yes, some people felt that the charter excluding Quebec was a big part of that. And so it is interesting to have Singh say he wants to include Quebec in the charter. And I think it's the right move. It'll be tricky, but I think it's the right spirit to have. Jonathan Castles, yeah, the final statement, vote for people who resemble you. Yeah, that was pretty ugly. That was pretty ugly. Maybe there's enough room for interpretation to say, like, resemble you in terms of your values, resemble you in terms of, those sorts of things. But even then, it's sort of tricky. It's like vote for real Quebecers. Well, even if you assume that he doesn't mean a particular race or lack of religious symbol, I think some people are going to read that as specifically an attack on Jagmeet Singh, and I do think that's extremely inappropriate. I really do. Brody asks me, would I vote for how do I feel about strategic voting? I'm not a strategic voter. Again, I've noted this on the stream. I won't tell people how to vote and how to arrive at their vote. You can vote for the best hair, the tallest person, the best looking person, the worst looking person. You can vote, or you can vote strategically, or vote based on values. Or you can vote to cause the most lulls, as if you were, if you live in Beauce and you want to vote for the wrong Maxime Bernier to defeat Maxime Bernier. Like, vote however you want. The point for me is, like, I don't vote strategically. I vote for the NDP each and every time. One of the reasons I support electoral reform, but that's just me. Again, the only context in which I wouldn't vote NDP is if I lived in Quebec, and provincially I would vote for the Quebec Solidaire. Only position. I vote for the NDP in PEI, no matter how small of a chance they have for winning, because it's my party. It's my party and it's my beliefs. Guillaume says, good night, Guillaume. Thanks for coming. Great to have you here. Thanks for coming by. Joshua says, Trudeau got smacked on by everyone, I thought. I mean, that's probably true. And that's not even necessarily a sign that Trudeau is bad, but, Trudeau's the prime minister. And in the polls, Trudeau has the highest polling in Quebec right now. And Trudeau's numbers falling could potentially help any of the other parties. Whether it's the Bloc, the NDP, or the Conservatives, they all could gain from Trudeau dropping a few points. And so it makes sense that when you're the big dog, that you get attacked more. I mean, when Stephen Harper was prime minister, that's what happened. And now Justin Trudeau's prime minister, and that's what will happen. Paul Cooper says, congrats on 100 live viewers. Paul, thank you so much. And thank you very much for the super chat donation. Again, your guys' support with things like that is crucial. It helps to improve the quality and quantity of content on the channel. So whether it's super chats or whether it's my Patreon, I mean, the reason that we have this new microphone, I've mentioned this a couple times, is because I hit a Patreon goal a couple weeks ago, and it's been great. When I get my new computer later on this year, I'm going to get a 4K camera. So the visuals will be improved as well. And so, it's come a long way, this channel, and that's because of you guys, to try to improve the quality, to make it a little bit more pleasing. I know you come here for the ideas more than the crisp visuals, but of course people want, something better than potato quality. And it's thanks to you guys that we have that. Lisa also says, congrats early to you on just hitting the 4.5K mark. Thank you so much, Lisa. That's great to see. Just 500 away from 5,000, which is a very exciting milestone. I'm very happy to almost be there. And again, it's thanks to your guys' support. Sarah says political junkies getting so sick of US politics that they're coming to Canadian politics. Yeah, I mean, our politics are screwed up in different ways, right? I mean, we have racism here, we have intolerance here, we have political dishonesty here, we have character driven scandals here. We don't have a Trump. That's very true. We don't have Trump. We have Bernier, but Bernier's at 3% and not, he's not president or prime minister, or he doesn't really have a chance of becoming a prime minister, at least not in this election. But it's great to see, on this channel, I like to cover Canadian politics because it is a rarity. I mean, the only other person who really covers Canadian politics on YouTube is David Dole, and even he does more American than Canadian. And I do some American too, but I generally do more Canadian than American. So I try to build that niche of covering Canadian politics from a progressive perspective. Trev B5, the NDP always has the best candidate in my area. In my 29 years of voting, I'm in Alberta, though. Cons always win. I mean, yeah, I've noted this on the channel that, like, politics aside, a lot of people in Alberta always wonder, like, why do we feel left out of Confederation? And maybe like they're wrong, and maybe Alberta gets enough attention, but provinces always wonder if they could get more. But if it is true, it's because Alberta is the biggest victim in Canada to the first past the post system. Because if you're a conservative, your vote is taken for granted, because in almost every riding, the Conservatives win by big margins. And if you're anybody else but a conservative, if you're a liberal or a green or an NDPer, there's only a couple seats at most every election that are up for grabs. It takes a really bad election for the Conservatives to lose more than 1 or 2 seats. And so for the most part, you look and you say, why campaign in Alberta? Like, what's to gain? And so the Conservatives take you for granted, and everyone else kind of ignores you. And BC gets way more attention because in BC, the Liberals, the Greens, the NDPers, and the Conservatives can all win seats. And Quebec gets a ton of attention because the Bloc, the NDP, the Liberals, the Conservatives, and maybe not this election, but maybe eventually the Greens as well, could win seats there. So that's 5 parties that can all win seats in your province. And I think that Alberta, more than any other province, would get so much more attention if there was proportionality, because now the NDP would have to campaign there and the Liberals would too, and not just campaign there, but offer policies, because Alberta is the 4th biggest province. They have 32 seats. And so, getting an extra 5% in Alberta for the Liberals or NDP right now literally does not matter, but it could matter if it was proportionality, where 5% would get you 1.5 seats. Somebody asked, why did Mad Max turn down CBC's face-to-face show? I'm not sure, actually. It's a great question. I have to look into that. Zachary says, I worked on Aisha's campaign and recommended her to be interviewed by Krista. Well, thank you so much, Zachary. I really appreciate that. Aisha, she was great. It was one of my interviews where she's running for the NDP in Guelph, and we talked specifically about healthcare because she has experience as a union activist and as a worker in the healthcare sector. So go check that interview out. I also have done an interview with Matthew Green where we talked about economic democracy and public ownership, and that was another great discussion as well. I've done a couple interviews with NDP candidates, none planned right now, but open to doing more if we can find a hook that's not just, why are you running, but like to talk about a particular issue of the campaign. And it's great to see. Maticus asks that, a lot of people on social media said Blanchet won, but how do you think Singh did? It's interesting. I think Singh had a good night. A lot of people in Quebec don't know him and maybe are building their conceptions about him based on what they've heard from other people, based on, what they've seen but not heard, right? And I think that tonight he certainly introduced himself well. He introduced himself as smart, as likable, as progressive, as sharing maybe not all the values of Quebec, like Bill 21, but sharing a lot of the pro-environmental, pro-worker, pro-feminist ideology that is popular in Quebec. And I think that this could help the NDP preserve some of those seats. Is it a good enough performance to send him shooting up in the polls? I'm not sure, but it certainly was a good performance. And there was a poll done before the like this morning, I think, asking Quebecers, who do you think will win tonight's debate? And Singh was last in that. And that's not great, but it does mean people had low expectations. And Justin Trudeau had a lot of low expectations in 2015. And jumping over those little hurdles was actually what gave him momentum. And you might see Jagmeet Singh benefit from that here too. People weren't expecting him to do well in Quebec, and I think he did do well. Was he the best? Not at all times, but he certainly wasn't the worst on the stage. Craig, that's a good question. I mean, today's been a really busy day. There was the debate, and then there was the whole issue with the man who came up to him today about the turban issue, and that really ate up the day. That one earlier today, that clip had over 250,000 views, and that was like hours ago. Like that really went viral. So I'm sure that him not wishing Bernie a good health isn't a purposeful thing. I think that it's probably something that might come, but I don't think that was an oversight. Sage and Fool, why doesn't the NDP not bring up scandals like Trudeau sending troops to far right nationalists in the Ukraine? I mean, I'm not sure, right? I mean, there's a balance here. I think Singh's trying to, and I think this has been one of the reasons he's found some success, especially in his personal approval ratings, is that he's staying pretty focused. He's hammering on key progressive issues, which is like we're going at the rich. Trudeau and Scheer are there for the rich, but not for you. We need pharmacare, dental care. And yeah, when he's talked about foreign policy, it's been used to criticize Trump and Saudi Arabia, very unpopular regimes. Another factor in Canada, and again, I'm not an expert here. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty, but it's very difficult to be critical of to wade into Ukrainian politics in Canada because we have a large Ukrainian Canadian population. And I think people are always wary about that, right? And it's very tricky to talk about Ukraine right now because people will take any criticism of Ukraine as pro-Putin, right? And we know that's not the case, but nuance is often lost on the issues where people don't know a lot. And so I think Singh is right to not wade into that issue, at least not himself, and focus on pharmacare, focus on Trump, focus on dental care, focus on childcare, focus on Trudeau, lying to young people, lying to Indigenous people. Like that's where the bread and butter is. Not to say that issue is not important, but I just don't know if it's a winner. Social Injustice said I'd watch a top 5 demands the NDP should make in a minority government video. I think that's a good video. But again, I think at this stage, I want to focus on the election as it is. And of course, as we know, we don't want to count any chickens before they hatch. We don't know if there'll be a minority government. We don't know, as unlikely as it sounds, we don't know if who's going to be prime minister. It could be Jagmeet Singh. I mean, maybe it's unlikely looking at the data. But we literally don't know, and I don't want to make a video that seems to imply that the election is over in that sense. But I mean, certainly as we get closer to election day and the numbers start firming up, a video about what the NDP should demand in a minority parliament, when I would say electoral, in no particular order, electoral reform, dental care, pharmacare, child care, and then probably, at the very least, the NDP's plan for banning student loan interest. But I think we didn't go far enough there. We should just make university free and abolish student loans, right? That would be my position. That would be my 5 big demands. I'm sure I'm missing certain things, but like those would be, for instance. But that's a great idea for a video. I mean, is it a good idea to open up the Constitution debate? I mean, that's always a tricky one, right? I'm not sure if it's a good idea or not, but I do think that Singh on principle is right, that not having Quebec in the Constitution is an issue, and it does need to be addressed. I mean, there's the politics of it, and then there's the philosophy of it, and I think the philosophy of it's very important. Zachary, I certainly would. If people can reach out to me, if people could reach out to me about that, if we could fit in our schedule, we could talk about a particular issue, as you know, whether it's northern issues or whether it's indigenous issues. That's certainly something on this channel. I haven't done, if there's one regret, it's I haven't talked a lot about indigenous issues, not because I'm not passionate about it or because it's not important, but because I'm especially wary of inserting my voice on issues where indigenous people should primarily be spotlighted. And so I would be happy to, at least, I mean, I can't make commitments because of scheduling and things like that, but I'd certainly be interested. Certainly. Jay asks if Green support will collapse in the weeks before the election. I mean, historically, that's what's happened, right? Green support has collapsed as we've gotten closer to an election. Now, are there some variables here? Yeah, the Greens have more 2 seats now. They've never had 2. Are they getting more attention than they ever had? Yeah, way more. Meaning they might be in voters' minds. Now, of course, the Greens have been getting negative coverage for the first time ever because people are actually scrutinizing them. But, I think they do collapse. But what do they collapse to? Some of the polls, like Ipsos came out yesterday, and it had the Greens at 7. And some other polls have the Greens at 11 or 12 or 13. And so are the Greens at 13 and they collapse to 9? Well, that's still way better than they normally do. Or are the Greens at 9 or 8 or 7 and they collapse to 6 or 5 or 4? Those are very different scenarios. And so I do expect the Green vote to fall in the final days. But where are they now and where do they fall to is a big question. And that'll determine whether or not they can pick up an extra seat or two. And if it goes really bad for them, if they lose Manley's seat back to the NDP, for instance, we don't know. Sven Robinson would make a good interview. Nikki would be great. Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to interview all these people. Nikki and I have some connections. We've met a few times. And I was a supporter of Nikki during the leadership contest. She was number 1 on my ballot. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to those folks. It's a matter of scheduling, whether they would be interested, things like that, Joshua says, has Jagmeet, speaking out about the U.S. back in the war in Yemen and other, he has spoken about Saudi Arabia. I mean, I don't know if he's spoken about the newest developments. To my knowledge, not so much, but he has spoken out about how Canada is effectively playing a role in facilitating Saudi Arabia's actions through the arms deal, and how Justin Trudeau is basically enabling human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia and also in Yemen, but perpetuated by Saudi Arabia. Beyond that, I'm not exactly sure. But he has been the only Canadian leader to call for Trump's impeachment, right? Which is great to see. Yeah, I could certainly, I could try to drop Nikki a line and see if we can find a schedule. The challenge now is like we're 3 weeks out from the election, so some of these things might happen afterwards. I mean, to talk to some of these folks, but there'd be great discussions, right? I certainly can look into it. Somebody asked, what do I think about splitting the vote? I mean, I understand why people bring it up. My perspective is that it's often used by liberals to justify voting for liberals everywhere. So if you are a strategic voter, like, I can't tell you not to, because again, I can't tell you how to vote or how to rationalize your vote, but I can tell you when you're being lied to. And so liberals will tell you in downtown Toronto or in Halifax or in St. John's, Newfoundland, or in downtown Winnipeg that you have to vote liberal to stop the conservatives, and they are lying to you, and that is bullshit, right? 100%. There are ridings in Toronto where the liberals and the NDP are within 5 points of one another, and the liberal and the NDP is 30 points ahead of the conservatives. And you will be told in those ridings that we have to stop Andrew Scheer. You'll be told that by the campaigners at the door, and you'll be told that by liberals on Twitter. And so the reality is that in so many ridings in this country, the NDP is the alternative to the conservatives, or the NDP and liberals are competing. And so you don't have to worry about electing a conservative. You can elect an NDPer, which not only represents your values, but will make more likely a minority government where neither Scheer nor Trudeau has unaccountable majority power, right? And so Matt, there was a guy on Twitter, Matt did I can maybe find the, like, maybe he's here. He's one of the, we converse a lot. He did a great Excel sheet showing 75 to 80 ridings minimum. These are just his minimum with the polling as it is right now. The polling gets better, those numbers would rise, where you could vote NDP without risking electing a conservative. And you could say send 80 MPs to Parliament from the NDP, which would be a strong third party at the very least, and would prevent a majority government from either party. Adam asks, what do I think about lab-grown meat? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I haven't eaten it. I think that it does solve some ethical issues, but I'm not an expert. I'm not a bioethicist. I don't know if people still have issues with those meat. There's questions of cost and availability. But I mean, I'm intrigued, and if it comes to a point that I would certainly try it, because I am a person who eats meat, and I do acknowledge that, especially when I eat beef, it has a high carbon footprint. You know, chicken's not as bad, but you know, if there is a way to allow us to eat meat because it's delicious and has good health outcomes, and we could do it without harming animals and expanding our carbon footprint, I think we should explore it. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think governments could look into it, both to ensure that it's safe, that that there are no adverse effects, but also that it could be part of an environmental strategy. Sage and Fool says, with again a very generous donation, thank you so much. Keep it up. You're doing a great job. I really appreciate hearing that. You know, this channel's really great, and one thing that's been fantastic is that as the channel's grown, I've noted this before, is that you get your regulars, you get your people that are always here supporting you, cheering you on. And when I would make some of my earlier videos, and one of my early videos criticized Faith Goldie and Lauren Southern, for instance, when they talked about the Great Replacement and things like that. And the videos got a lot of views, but they were like 50% dislikes because it was all alt-right PPCers and whatnot flowing into the comments, just demolishing me, like, on everything, right? And I didn't have like a fan base to comment back. But now it's like my regulars are always there, and they like help me clean up the trolls. It's really great. These are like the things you see. Social Injustice says, you don't think the numbers will firm up as we approach the election? I mean, that's a fair point. I think one thing to note is that this week, not like this Monday to Friday, but literally the next 7 or 8 days or so, are when the 3 of the 4 debates are happening. Because we had the McLean's debate, and Singh did well there, and I think that helped him. And then we didn't have a debate for like a couple weeks. And there was the debate tonight, and then next week on the 7th, I believe, and the 10th, there are the last 2 debates. So within 8 days of one another, there are 3 debates. And then after that last debate, there's only like 10, 11 days till the election. So there's a chance that with 3 debates, 2 in French, 1 in English, that there's going to be a bigger chance for movement. And that's going to be a crucial week. If there is likely to be movement, the debates can be those moments. I mean, there were 2 things that moved Jack Layton in 2011. Like, of course, it wasn't just these 2 things, but there were 2 flashpoints. One, he went on Tout le monde en parle and had a great performance. Singh went on Tout le monde en parle and had a very good performance as well. Didn't seem to cause a bump in Quebec, although maybe it hasn't manifested yet. And then also he had that very, very good English debate performance where he basically said to Ignatieff, like, if you want a promotion, you have to show up to work. and made that great remark. And then from then on, he took off and he became the clear second choice. And so the debates can play a key role. Zachary says, I think the Greens will keep their 2 seats. I mean, the numbers look like that, but I mean, I'm saying, like, where are they? If they're at 7 and they dip from there, maybe not. But if they're at 10, which is their average is around 10, and they dip down to 7, they might keep those 2 seats. Yeah, the Great Dominion says, yeah, Indigenous people, yeah, certainly. I think that Indigenous people have certainly fallen out, favor. Whether or not they end up voting with the CPC first, I think remains to be seen. But I do expect that the NDP is going to see some gains from Indigenous communities based on the fact that the NDP, more than any other party, is running Indigenous people, and because the Liberals broke so many promises. But I do expect the Conservatives to do better amongst Indigenous people than they normally do, because some of that vote will bleed to the Conservatives. Yeah, Matticus makes a great point. In 2008, the Greens actually had one of their best performances ever. We often forget that 2008 was a great Green period. In 2008 or so, they were polling above 10 briefly, not as consistently as they are now, and they ended up around 6 or 7. Now, they didn't win a seat then. The Greens sacrificed national success in 2011 and 2015 in an effort to win Elizabeth May's seat and other seats in southern British Columbia. It didn't pay off in those elections, beyond May, but they did stop trying to do national campaigns. So they sacrificed overall votes for, regional strength. Social Injustice says on the ratings the Ottawa has given to the Green and Liberals costing plans. I mean, I do agree with their green assessment that it's far too rudimentary. There's too much uncertainty. I haven't dug into their Liberal one. My understanding of the Liberal one is that they thought it was at least plausible. I think my concern with the Liberal one is that a lot of the things they haven't submitted for costing are some of the most important things. And like the Liberals, for instance, have been less than clear about their pharmacare ambitions, which leads me to believe that that they're not going to do anything. They're going to win and forget it. And yeah, I don't know if you guys heard this, and I've noted this in some of my recent videos. Catherine McKenna was like, well, we don't have the details of our climate plan, but we just got to get through this election first. That's like exactly what Doug Ford said. It's like, look, we'll get to the details after you give me my absolute power. Okay? Like, give me my absolute power. I'll get you the details right after that. And that's what the Liberals sound like. And so they don't give me a lot of confidence in that regard. So they clearly have a more regimented plan than the Greens. That's not surprising. They have way more resources behind them. But I'm not super impressed. Yeah, Jonathan, that's a good question. I mean, I was going to say when I was reading your comment, well, like Jagmeet did speak about it, and I made a video about it. I don't know if you guys saw that. And I think it's a super important issue. I don't know why Jagmeet Singh's not talking about it more. It might be the case that it's perceived that the party that talks about it thinks they're going to lose and is trying to talk about it. I'm not sure. I think it should be a bigger issue, but I wonder if internal polling and timing indicates that if you are talking about electoral reform, you want to do it later in the election. I'm not exactly sure of the motivation, but I would be talking about it more. And that video is actually done quite well for core Canadian topics. Like the video, like I produce good, consistent viewership from my Canadian videos. They always get at least a 500-600 really good views with good watch time and all that. But the ceiling is lower than when I make a video aimed at like a broader audience, like something more drama, something more juicy. But that video on Singh has gotten over Singh in electoral form has gotten over 3,000 views. It's been sharing a ton on Facebook and Twitter, and I think that shows that a lot of people do care about this issue. And you're right, even Elizabeth May, to my knowledge, hasn't spoken a lot about electoral reform, which is very surprising. Maticus, there it is. Yes, Maticus right here. Just I didn't want to make sure. Basically, he's the one that designed that really great spreadsheet. Go check that out. Maticus, I don't know if you can share a link. I don't know if you can do that, but if you can find a way to, like, with spaces and stuff, share out your Twitter, that would be great. Let people know to check out your Twitter. It's a fantastic list of candidates. Of course, like some people have challenged Matt on some of the details, but on the whole, it's a great project. And I think that it's a good example to show that if you are, like, you might have family and friends that you know are strategic voters, and it's easy. It might be, you know, futile to push them off the strategic voting bandwagon. So the point has to be in some cases then to say, okay, you are a strategic voter, but here's how you actually vote strategically. And I think that's a good tool. Yeah, Lisa makes a good point about the Greens. It's really interesting. I mean, if you watched my video on diversity, the NDP is the only party running a slate of candidates that looks like Canada, like half men and women, a good amount of Indigenous people and racialized people, LGBTQ, disabled people, what have you. And I think that's important. Some people say, well, why don't you just run the best people? But it's like, these are the best people. We've done a good job in finding them. And also, it's like in a representative democracy, you want people that represent the citizens of that democracy. And so the Greens have done a good job on some of the issues. The Greens have done a really good job at recruiting LGBTQ candidates, and the Greens have done a good job at recruiting women, better than all the other parties except for the NDP. But they've done very poorly on recruiting Indigenous people and racialized people. And I think the Greens right now are finding real trickiness on the question of a woman's right to choose. A recent Press Progress article suggested that, you know, the Greens weren't vetting people on the issue because Elizabeth May said, well, we don't whip votes, but we vet people on questions like choice. And so we wouldn't vet somebody with that issue. But as it turns out, dozens of Greens were not actually vetted on the issue, showing that the Green Party is maybe ambivalent on it and they're trying to cover their tracks. It's very concerning. Maticus gives out some details there that some of those seats are more likely to be NDP. Some of them are more fringe. But the point is that voting NDP in those ridings does not, quote unquote, you know, help Andrew Scheer. And I think that's a great point. Trev says, this is my first time live. Great interview with Michael Brooks. Somebody said, more collabs with Brooks, please. Preferably while he does the Sam Setter impression. I mean, I love talking with Michael. I'd be happy to go on again. I'm sure we'll be on at some point, when it fits his schedule and my schedule. But yeah, it was a really fun interview. I mean, it was really great. And again, like on the day I did that, I gained about 200 subs, which for a channel of my size is a lot, right? That's a lot to gain in one day. 200 a day is a ton. I mean, I often gain 20 or 30 a day on average, let's say, when I'm just posting my own videos, sometimes less. But a lot of people came from his channel, and it's really great to see because I think his content's some of the best on YouTube. Vahab, I mean, I'm not sure how Indigenous people are rationalizing their vote. I really don't know, and I can't comment too deeply. It could be based on, some people vote liberal or conservative. They don't often consider the NDP. It could be based on certain communities being pro pipeline. It could be based on certain communities. Again, as Andrew Scheer noted, I don't believe Andrew Scheer, but maybe he's speaking to some Indigenous people who feel Andrew Scheer is going to bring jobs to certain communities because he's going to cut red tape. But I'm not sure. I don't want to comment further than that because I don't want to speak for Indigenous people. Yeah, Marc Andre Rad interviewed her. Yeah, Rad, I have to check out. I know you mentioned that to me before, but it's kind of like a youth oriented Radio Canada YouTube channel where they talk about politics and stuff. So I certainly have to check them out. Zachary, that's a good point. There are from, if you are a social conservative, you might vote for the conservatives, even if they might not have your interests in other ways. TMST with a generous super chat donation. Thank you so much. I very much appreciate that. Asks, do you think certain provinces are key voting areas? I.e., does Singh need to win Quebec to win the election? In general, Quebec and Ontario are the key provinces because more than one party can win in them, and that's where the bulk of seats are. Like, there's most, like, I don't know how many it is. It's not exactly half, of course, but it's like a big chunk of seats are available in those provinces. And so those are the key provinces. Other provinces sometimes are too small, or they become too wedded to one party. So, for instance, Alberta has 32 seats. It's the fourth biggest province, but Alberta only pretty much gives all its seats to the Conservatives, and it loses its battleground province. BC is another key battleground because it's the third biggest province, and any of the parties can win seats there. So BC is always a battleground. Specifically, a battleground in this election and in many elections is suburban Ontario. Like, just north of Toronto, east of Toronto, the 905, we call it, because that's the area code. And that's always a crucial battleground for liberals and conservatives because the suburban areas tend to vote for one or the other. And so Stephen Harper, for instance, won his majority largely, not just there, but largely off strength in the 905. That's where Doug Ford won. And people are suggesting that Justin Trudeau, because of a backlash against Ford, could flip a ton of those seats to the Liberals and win a majority off that. So that's a crucial area. Quebec is crucial as well, but that's the big talking point is the 905. Some Miraculously, Adam, like, how the election works step by step, how candidates are chosen. I mean, I could give a quick rundown. The way it works basically is, if you're an independent, you just need to get enough of your citizens from the riding to basically sign your nomination papers and you can run. If you want to run for a party, the way it works is you go to the party, you seek the nomination. The party will often vet you, aka they'll ask you questions, they'll look through your writings and your social media, and they'll determine whether they want you to be a candidate or not. And then often what will happen is there'll be an election at the local level for all the members of the party to come vote, and they will select the nominee. And then that person will be nominated, and then that will be like the ballot. And so on election day, you go and you mark your name for that particular person. And so in Canada, we don't elect the prime minister. We elect 338 members of parliament, and then they go off to parliament, and then they effectively elect the prime minister, which is almost always at the federal level, the leader of the biggest party, although it doesn't have to be them. Comrade says even the Communist Party has a pretty diverse roster of candidates this year. Thank you so much, Con. I should have looked into that. I mean, I don't want to exclude them, but it was like when the research was coming out, it was based on the fact that, like, here are the parties that are going to be in the debates and stuff like that. And even still, I mean, the Liberals didn't give a lot of data. I mean, the Liberals didn't tell us how many people of color they have. They only gave us gender data. And so I don't know if the Liberals are just disorganized or trying to hide something, but they didn't give us a whole lot. The Conservatives weren't diverse at all. The PPC was more diverse on race than the Greens, which was very interesting. Stephen Colbert, not the real one. We confirmed last time, but it's still great he's here. Better late than never. Thanks for stopping by. Gavin asks, do you know what the NDP's plan to tackle organized crime? I mean, part of it is there's a few factors. One is decriminalization of narcotics is supposed to be part of that strategy. it can make it easier to focus in on trafficking, at least hypothetically, and to limit the influence of organized crime. Another factor is to target money laundering, both through general means, but specifically as it applies to housing. Some people have suggested that there's a connection between organized crime on the one hand and the housing, the dark housing money on the other. And I think those are a couple key strategies. But I'm not super versed on that. So if somebody in the comments wants to fill in something I missed, you can certainly do that. Alibi asked, where was the debate? Just to kind of say it again, not to repeat myself, but basically the debate was on TVA, which is a French channel that in Quebec. I don't know if it's available on TV everywhere. I don't have cable anymore, but I know that when I grew up in New Brunswick, we got that channel, and I'm pretty sure it's available at least in Kingston, because we're in Eastern Ontario. We have a large Francophone population. And it was on TVA Nouvelle. Just like if you look up TVA debate, you'll see it. And CPAC is running it / will be running it on their website and channel. And by then it will be translated. It was only in French as it ran live. There was no dubbed version where like the translator spoke over them. Maticus, I mean, I think that's a fair point. I mean, it's a hard question, right? Like, I sort of agree that they could have done a little bit better on selling the EI policy. I like the idea of giving a shorter leave option. It gives people who need to get back to work or who only have so much time off the ability to still get the money they need. But of course, I think we should find as many ways as possible to give people parental leave and do it in a manner that respects the diversity of families, but also encourages splitting of parental leave so that men and women are more likely to each take some, which fights the perpetuation of child-based wage gaps, because that is a big factor. I mean, the wage gap exists for a variety of reasons, but one of the biggest factors, women often take hits during their child rearing years, and they often never quite recover. And so any policy to make it easier to take time off, more affordable, I think is good. I think we could do better there, but I do think that a commitment to childcare is going to be one of the biggest steps. Zachary says the NDP is focusing on a restorative justice model. I think that's a good point. Whether it's enough or what have you, I don't know. But I do know that, for example, when we approach decriminalization, the goal is to say, the problem with drugs in our community, it's not that it isn't real. It's not that there aren't actual effects. It's not like we're saying this is all hunky-dory, but he is saying like this is a mental health and poverty and issue. This is not a we need more cops issue, right? And I think that's a kind of crucial point. CRE 2525 asks, what do you think the biggest difference between the Greens and the NDP are? Thanks for the streams. Thanks for coming by. I mean, there's a lot of differences. I mean, I would say that the biggest one is I think the NDP has more of a consistent focus on economic justice than the Greens. And this isn't to say the Greens are absolutely devoid of that, but it's to say that the Greens often have a kind of eco-capitalist lens, which can be, in conflict with economic justice. And also, the Greens, I think, have a different approach to their environmental plan. They have some good goals. The Green Party has some good ambitions, but they're green. They don't have a Green New Deal. They don't really include Indigenous people meaningfully in their plan. They don't include workers meaningfully in their plans. Whereas the NDP is at least trying to do so. And I think that's the big difference. Craig, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, we spoke about it, of course, you and I on social media, but also I noticed that last night too. I posted on Facebook about it. I think that's very encouraging. I think that's extremely encouraging to see that, in individual communities at least, that the NDP is not only showing resilience, but showing some growing strength. And I think that's going to be crucial because I think that there is a strong base to build on here. And even if this isn't the election, again, I haven't given up on anything, because I think Singh has shown he's a really good campaigner. But if this is going to be an election where the goal is building a strong progressive base of leftists, of socialists and democratic socialists, and holding the balance of power, that we're going to need ridings like, in downtown Winnipeg, we're going to need MPs like Leah Gazan in Parliament. And I think it's crucial to see that. Matthew, with the very generous and numeral alliterative, if you will, donation, says Emily Leadham tweeted for an overthrow of Labour leadership in Canada. Do you have a hot take on what we can do to improve Labour in the short term? I mean, I have to be a little careful because my wife is a something of a labor. She's one of a next gen coordinator for the steelworkers. So I don't want to wade in too much, but I do agree with her that like okay, under Mulcair's leadership, you could make the case that like the NDP was not doing enough for labor and like they were sort of being too conservative. But in some ways now, many unions are holding back the NDP. They're not being ambitious enough in their demands. And some of the unions are staying silent on, again, the issue in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, while the NDP has taken a stand. And so it's like some unions have been really progressive, but then some others, and I'll say like Unifor, have just been totally willing to ignore Justin Trudeau and his failures and his human rights abuses, whether it's the charter right to strike or whether it's what's happening in Saudi Arabia, and just give him all this defense. And I think it's terrible. And I know Emily is not an NDPer. Like, she's not a supporter of the NDP. So she wouldn't want me to turn this into the labor leaders are bad because they're not backing the NDP. But I think that she makes a good point that, often people just talk about, the NDP needs a left turn and we have to turf the neoliberals. But I think in the labor movement, there does need to be a leftward movement as well in many of our major unions. And I don't see a problem with talking about that, because I think that whether it's fighting two-tier concessions or whether it's getting leaders that are more committed to organizing, I think we need to see that. But currently, I'm not a union member. I've been a member of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. I've been a member of my faculty association at Queen's. But as a postdoc right now, my position is ununionized because of my funding coming from the government directly rather than the university. So I don't want to just insert myself into a movement where I'm not a member of right now too directly. Maticus, thanks so much for that comment. It's great to see. I mean, I'm not an expert on money laundering, but it's good to see the NDP plan has some good perspective. Trev says that on Shaw Cable, at least, TVA used to be free. Good to know. So it might be a free channel for those of you who have, basic cable or just you have your digital antenna. Maticus says a dubbed version is available on CPAC, so certainly check that out. Somebody says, what age, this may be a bad question, but what age you think is the right for voting? Well, thank you for the question. I don't think that's a bad question at all. There's a debate right now, some people in the NDP suggest 14, and I'm not against 14, but I think the practical, we could get this done, is 16. I think 16 makes a lot of sense. We're already trusting these people to operate cars. We're trusting these people to work jobs, and during the summer to basically work full-time adult jobs. We expect them to do a lot of these things. We expect them to go to jail as adults when they commit certain crimes. We expect them to pay taxes. In some cases, at 17, you can join the military. They have been taking civics classes in school. I think 16 is the right age for people to vote at. That's my view. I think 16 is the right age. At least what we could sell. I mean, the Ontario NDP passed a resolution of 14, but the official party policy this election is 16, and I support that. And actually, for those of you out in BC, there was the Union of British Columbia Municipalities passed a resolution asking the provincial government there to lower the voting age to 16. And I think that the provincial government might not listen, but for those NDPers out and Greens as well, because they have a role in that government too, who want to see the voting age lowered, go to John Horgan and Andrew Weaver and say to them, like, lower the voting age, because I think I like that idea. And maybe they'll do it if they feel that there's real support for it. Yeah, Stephen Colbert, you say Singh's had his moment. It hasn't really changed yet. It's interesting, right? Because I mean, some of the polls have certainly improved. If you look at there was those doomsday polls by Ecos and Main Street that had the NDP at like 7, and now they both have the NDP above 11. Now that's not like anything to celebrate, but it is to say that like, those polls have really gone up, and Nanos has now has us above 15 again. Some polls are showing some declines for the Greens, although not all of them. And I think, like, at the very least, he's building a solid base around 14%. About 3 weeks out from the election, this is where Jack Layton was, at least in some polls. And so the good thing to look at for Singh right now is his personal approvals are going up. And some polls are suggesting that the NDP is increasingly becoming the second choice of multiple parties. And so the groundwork is being laid for a bit of an upward swing. Now, does it happen? I don't know, but I think he's certainly building up and solidifying that core 14 or so percent. And I think there's room to take some votes from the Liberals and Greens as the election goes on. And I think that, that's a good perspective. But you're right, the polls haven't shot up yet, but his personal numbers have. And maybe that's the first step. People needed to learn who he was. Now they're considering, will they pull the trigger? I don't know. Philip says, "Do you think the NDP could embrace socialism more strongly?" Yes, they could. I mean, I would want them to. I mean, I think that we should not be just talking about, ending student loans. Uh, we should talk about free universal education from pre-K to PhD. We should also talk about, not just you know, uh, price controls on telecoms. Although I think that's a good policy, because monopolies should have price, and oligopolies should have mechanisms to prevent them exploiting people. But we need a publicly owned telecom company. We need more public ownership. We need we need a public bus and rail system. We need to expand via rail. We need to add buses to it. Like, there's so much more that the public could do through public ownership. And Jagmeet has done some of this stuff, but he could go further. I think he could go further. Dav562, you asked, what do you think about the opposition between the NDP and Greens? I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that wording. My take is that on the whole, like, I mean, it's not ideal to see the Greens and the NDP fighting, but I mean, I feel like the Greens sort of deserve it. I mean, the Greens have a lot of inconsistencies, and I think they need to be pointed out. Whether it's on Indigenous people or whether it's on, do they support the right of a woman to choose or not? And it's like, I think that Canadians need to know these things, and I mean, the NDP has had to do the work of pointing it out, and I think rather successfully. And I think that the Greens might feel that, like, they need to call out the NDP's inconsistencies on the environment, whether it's on LNG or things like that. Although I will remind people that if the Green Party in British Columbia really had an issue with the NDP's environmental policy, they would pull the government down, but they haven't, right? But like, I mean, I think these combats need to happen. I do. Zachary asked, "Did I see the abacus data on Canadians' feelings towards unions?" I haven't seen those specific data. I haven't seen it. I could certainly take a look. My general reading of these data was like, people like all the things unions do, but then when you mention unions, the support falls. It's much like the NDP, as it were, where they like all of our policies, but then they say, "Oh, that's an NDP policy." I don't know, and that's like a big challenge. Tuak, that's just a Tuak. That's UFCW, right? But is that UFCW in French? I just want to double check there. Um, they do have some political ambitions. Uh, they are something of an NDP union, but you're right. They're not the most political union, say, compared to the Steelworkers or to CUPE, who are very political, or Unifor, but just in a bad way, right? No, social injustice, you're right. I think the arguments are well made about 14. My concern is, can you sell that to people? And it's like, I know it sounds terrible because, like, I'm not like, I don't want to be one of these people that's like, well, we got to be moderate to win. But it's like, I do feel that, like, if you go for 14, what if you don't get anything? But if you go for 16, then maybe 5 years from now, you can get the 14-year-olds, right? Like, I don't know, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know. It's like, what do I want versus what do I think can pass? I think 16 can win. I do. I do. So Datrave says, I don't understand the enthusiasm for a lower voting age. I mean, I think it's important. I think that young people are maybe more engaged than they've ever been. We've seen them how engaged they are in climate issues and in social justice issues. Young people today have way more political awareness than the average young person when I was a child. I mean, I was a political junkie. I watched the news all the time, Canadian news, American news. I read, all of that. But most kids didn't. Nowadays, it's like finding a kid who's interested in politics. It's easy. I mean, they're super into it, right? And I think that, like, they're so engaged and they want to make an impact and their voices aren't being heard. And I do think it's important. I think 16-year-olds being able to vote at the minimum is what I'd support. BCNDP to propose permanent daylight savings time, 93% support. Is permanent daylight savings, is that just banning it? Like, I don't understand. Is that just ending daylight savings time and just not changing the clock? I mean, I'm in general support of that. I've seen some data about how it causes heart attacks and things like that. And it causes car accidents and all these sorts of things, and costs economic productivity, makes it hard to do international trade during those times. Yeah, I don't see the need for it. I mean, I saw a really good video by CGP Grey a bunch of years ago about why it's stupid. So, I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things that it's like, it's popular, but I'm like, is Singh gonna do a press conference on it? I mean, I'm not sure. I think it's important though. Alibi, yeah, you ask about the difference between the Green and the NDP. Yeah, you're right. Well, I talked about that. I think the biggest one is the worker consciousness. The NDP has more of an economic lens of social justice that I feel the Greens lack. That's my biggest thing. I think Zachary makes a good point. I don't know if this is true or not, but I do feel that if you introduce kids to politics in high school, that very first election, the polling, like, they could vote, you vote at 16, the polling stations can be in the schools. And I wonder if, now this is speculation, I don't know if there are other countries where 16-year-olds can vote. And if so, like, does young voting encourage them to keep voting? But I think that if you start voting at 16 and you actually do vote, then maybe you'll be more likely to keep voting. And I think that's important. Philip said, what do you think of the Greens saying they wanted to take the politics out of democracy? I mean, it sounds sort of autocratic. Like, it sort of sounds like they want to, like, I don't know. Like, it sounds really bad, but I think it's just silly. I just think it's like that sort of like green, we're not ideological, like, babble that I just don't buy. Like, I hate that. I hate people who are like, we don't have an ideology. It's like the not left, not right, but forward thing that the Greens and Andrew Yang talk about. And like this whole, like, we're going to take the politics out of politics. But it's like, no, like, politics is important. Like, there are clear political and social and economic and cultural differences in society, and those things are in conflict, and that's politics, and you will never get rid of that. That's why we have elections, and that's why we have debates. That's why we have protests. That's why, God forbid we have wars, right? Like you can't get rid of these things. They will exist probably forever in some way or another. Mo asks, do you know where I can watch the debate? Again, on TVA, it was there. It's probably still there. You can probably watch it on demand. Only in French, no translation. CPAC has it now. It should be available with an English translation. Zachary says a plurality of young people supporting unions. That doesn't surprise me, because I think a lot of young people are progressive. And I also think a lot of young people are seeing firsthand that like jobs without benefits, without unions, without protections, without security, they really suck. And, they're like, well, probably need a union. And I think like maybe for some boomers that, at least, before say the neoliberal turn, whether they were in a union or not, they got the benefits of like good labor laws, and just the threat of a union often made employers behave better. Employers have become so like emboldened to be jerks in many cases because they don't fear unions like they used to. I think that young people right now are asking for some kind of difference. So that doesn't surprise me. And I don't know if it doesn't surprise me, but like I can see why. Yeah, Craig makes a good point. There are differences there. Jack, for instance, like Singh, according to Angus Reid, is the only leader positive right now. But Jack Layton was very well liked in 2011. So he was not just, positive, but quite a bit more popular. Of course, Jack Layton didn't face the same racial issues that Jagmeet does. And Jack Layton was more well liked in Quebec. And like the Liberals had a very weak leader. So there's differences here. There's greater challenges for Jagmeet Singh, but of course there's still the same underlying opportunities. And maybe even if you don't think he can win, you don't think Singh can go from 14 where he is now to 30 or 35 or whatever. Certainly Singh could go from 14 to 25, and I think that's more than possible, and that would be a very strong election. Again, I think Singh is a very young man. He's 40 years old. There's a long time to grow with this leader, and I think that Canadians can grow with him. It doesn't just have to be a one election strategy all in. But I'm not giving up on this one. Yeah, somebody said, well, what if the Greens' record on foreign policy and it would depend on the Green? I think that's a good point. One challenge with the Green Party, there's a bunch of challenges. I'm trying to be fair here. They're a very new party in grand historical terms. They've only existed for like a generation and a bit. And they've only ever started finding any electoral success in the last 10 years. And only recently have they elected more than like 2 or 3 people in a given election. And that was in PEI. And so for a long time, the Greens have never really had to test any policy. Like even the CCF, we formed a government in Saskatchewan in 44. We have formed official opposition in 43 in Ontario. We elected, caucuses all across the country at the federal and provincial levels. Early on, the NDP, like the CCF NDP, found early success. The Greens, not so much. And so they don't have a lot of set policy. And in addition, hypothetically at least, because we don't know because the Greens have never really formed a whole lot of caucuses, they don't whip votes. And so they have a policy book, and there's some good policies in there, and there's some really bad policies in there, but they don't necessarily have to follow their own policies, right? Even less than other parties. And so it's hard to predict the Greens, positions. Somebody else said the workers' cooperatives exist in Canada. I mean, they do, but they're not as prominent as there should be. There are some. We do need more workers' cooperatives. We have more consumer cooperatives in Canada, although sometimes they get into conflict with their workers. And so there's some issues that happen there. There are workers' cooperatives, but it's not like, in certain parts of Spain where like, the Mondragon and things like that. Eric Viola says, with every party moving right over the last 30 years, what's preventing the NDP from being bolder on their platform? Well, I think you partially answered the question. In part, it's the rightward movement. The Overton window has moved so far right. And sometimes the NDP's been at fault for that, if we're being honest, because we haven't done a good enough job defending our left flank and keep pushing leftward. And often we've capitulated. They're starting that process, but it takes time. It takes time to move leftward. Disturbed one, I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think young people will destroy the country. And if you look at young people, they're not as wedded to one party as boomers are to conservatives. Old people are very much wedded to one party, whereas young people are considering the NDP, Greens, Liberals, and even the Conservatives. I would say young people in some ways are willing to hear out multiple voices, maybe more than some other generations. Alibi asks, what do I think about first past the post? I think it's bad. I think that the Liberals lying about removing it was awful. Like, it was their worst lie because that lie was so central, I think, to why a lot of people voted for them. And that lie is now being used by them to justify why you should vote for them again. It's like the system, because the Liberals' argument, now here's why it really made me mad. The Liberals' argument when they canceled electoral reform was that they worried that it would elect a dangerous far-right government. And so they kept first past the post. And now they use that argument saying that if Andrew Scheer gets 39% of the vote, he could win, a far-right government could come to power. Well, it's like, yeah, because you kept the broken system. So it's like, yeah, first past the post is awful. I support a proportional system. I like mixed member proportional, although I am open to STV, single transferable vote, which is not ranked ballot. People often confuse them. I don't like ranked ballot systems unless they are for single office positions. So, for instance, if we elected the governor general, then I would be in support of a ranked ballot for that one position. Or I liked ranked ballots at the municipal level when there are no parties. When it's, in Ontario, for instance, my city, Kingston, we're going to have a ranked ballot. It works because you can't have proportionality if there's no party system. There's no slates to distribute votes within. So I support ranked ballots there, proportional at the federal and provincial level. Zachary says, back to the debate. Thanks for trying to get us back on topic. Although I think these discussions have all been in the general realm of the election. Strongest talking for Jagmeet tonight. I think it was hammering home on healthcare, pharmacare, and then hammering home that the Liberals and Conservatives are parties of the rich. When he did that, he came off as strong and and powerful and confident. That was the best part. When he was like, Trudeau's for the rich, Trudeau's for Trump, Trudeau, broke down on his progressive promises. Andrew Scheer will not be any better. Scheer says you'll get a tax cut, but actually he's going to give all the money to the top 1%, top 10%. Vote for the NDP and get policies that matter to you. That's when he was at his strongest. He stuck on that message. There were other strong parts, but that's when he was like, he got his message and he's hammering the message. And I think that's important. Janessa asks, who else can I follow for progressive Canadian commentary? Well, there are other Canadian left tubers. There's like Mexi, there's Step Back History, there's the Surfs. You want to check out all of these people, but they don't really do, and they do political content, but they don't do politics as much as I do. So they'll talk about history or they'll talk about political issues, but they won't so much talk about electoral politics. Although the Surfs do a little bit, and the Surfs will be doing a some live streams next week, I think, about the debates, and I will be a guest for some of those. So you'll want to look at them. David Dole, though, is probably the best option. The Rational National. I've been on his channel a bunch of times. He has a lot of good Canadian commentary, not as much as he does American, but he does probably at least 1 or 2 Canadian videos a week, and he's doing more because it's the election. So both him and I, for instance, did a video today about the guy telling Jagmeet Singh to cut his turban off. And you'll see similar takes from David and I, but we do approach things slightly different. So check us both out. And David's been a big supporter of me. Like when I first started YouTube, he had me on his channel when I had like no subscribers and brought a lot of people to the channel and like just showed me like how to like position my camera better, how to position my microphone. He was like, okay, here's how you set up your new fancy mic. He told me how to do all of that. Like he was fantastic. So if for nothing else, support him because he supports me. Yeah, we have first past the post. Yeah, people are like, it elects radicals who don't represent the people. And it's like, yeah, well, that's what Doug Ford is. That's a great point. And I noted that too. Doug Ford might have become premier under a proportional system. Maybe. But even if he was premier right now, because like say the Liberals and Greens and the NDP couldn't agree on a coalition, he would not be able to do the very worst of what he's doing. Like the worst Doug Ford policies wouldn't be happening. You know, he would be blocked by the rest of the parties. The Great Dominion Jagmeet needs to tell us how many MPs there need to be. I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, under some versions of MPP, what you do is you keep the parliament the same size and say take a third to a quarter of the seats and make those regional ones. The upside to that is you don't increase the size of parliament if that's an issue for you. The downside is the ridings would become bigger. Like each electoral riding would become bigger. In cities, that might not be a big deal. It might just mean that the ridings just become a few kilometers bigger. But in rural areas, that might mean a rather large increase in the size of your riding. Or you could add, say, an extra 100 seats to parliament, and those would be the proportional seats. Everyone's ridings would stay exactly the same, and you would add more seats. Although if you have an issue with the size of parliament, then you might not like that idea. That's a good point. There are some questions Jagmeet Singh we need to roll out about the specifics of his MMP. That is one of them. Philip says, the BQ leader closer to the left or to the right this time? I mean, that's an interesting question. I would say he's probably a little bit more right-leaning, but again, it depends on the issue. He supports Bill 21 and had some pretty ugly language, like vote for a leader that resembles you and stuff. I mean, like that's some pretty ugly right-wing stuff to me. But then on the other hand, he like supports Quebec social programs. He very much takes a stand in favor of women's rights. He very much takes a stand against Andrew Scheer on tar sands. And so the bloc is very ideologically eclectic. They're hard to pin down. Mark says, speaking of the Governor General, why do we maintain this odd ceremonial to importance to the royalty? What are the real consequences would there be to tossing the whole thing? I mean, the big challenge is it's constitutionally extremely difficult. It would basically require unanimity. Every province would need to support it. I don't see the politics lining up right now, so it's hard to talk about something that I see as unlikely. People have this romantic connection. Some people think the monarchy gives us a barrier of protection, although you could have a president. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not a monarchist, but I'm not so anti-monarchy that it's a priority for me. You know, it is what it is. Like that's all. Like it is what it is. We've talked about it before, but it is what it is. Sarah says, is there a place to buy your books so that you get more money? My dad's making a birthday wish list and no stores near me sell it. Yeah, that's a problem with academic books. Unfortunate as it is, my book didn't get listed in too many stores. But if you're looking to buy it, the best place is probably the publisher's website, just UBC Press. Like it would, if you look up my book, that'll be the best place to buy it. But like honestly, I see money either way. You could probably buy it sometimes cheaper from Chapters Indigo or Amazon. I know a lot of people don't shop at Amazon. I know the politics there, but the publisher's website would probably be the best option, and it's good for the publisher too, which helps them publish more books like mine as well. You might also check if you're not sure. Sometimes it's hard if there's a university in your town. University bookstores might have a copy, so you might check there too. Sometimes they have them. Philip says, "Well, yeah," and that's a good point. Philip notes, like Ford would have won the election in any system. I mean, okay, on the one hand, if we interpret if all the parties existed as they were and it was a proportional vote, then yes, under a proportional system, Ford would have gotten the most seats in that election. And so he would have been given the right to try to form a government. But would he have been able to? We don't know. Would Andrea Horwath, for instance, would have been able to go to Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals and the Greens, who would have gotten more seats because of a proportional system, and say to them, hey, join up with me, make me premier, we can stop Doug Ford. That might have happened. Ford could have still been premier. But the fact is not only is Philip noting that the system is very different, because if it's proportional, maybe the Conservative Party breaks into two parties. If it's proportional, the Greens maybe get more votes. If it's proportional, maybe other new parties form on the left and the right. Like, we don't know. The point is, however, is that if everything was the same, but Ford got about 40% of the seats in the House, he could still govern, but would need always at least one other party to support him to pass legislation. And so for some of his policies, he could get that support. But for others, he would effectively be forced to. So, for instance, no other party would have supported his plan to unilaterally change city council elections in Toronto. He could not have done that. No other party would support his position to cut as many teaching jobs as he is. Even the Liberals, who love attacking public services when they can get away with it, would not support that. And so it's like there would be checks on his power because he doesn't deserve a majority. Look, as bad as it is, Jason Kenney's situation is very different. Kenney won a majority. Like, he has actual majority power. Doug Ford does not deserve that. He didn't win it. The consummate liberal. I mean, the consummate liberal works too as well. I mean, would the DAV 562 ask, would Trudeau be more open to coalition with the Conservatives over the NDP? I mean, ideologically, I would say so, probably. Personally, the Liberal Party supporters would not be, and so I don't think he could ever do it. I think that, you know, in provinces where the NDP has been strong historically, there's often a conservative liberal alliance against them. In BC, it's called the BC Liberals. And in Saskatchewan, it's called the Sask Party. And in Manitoba, it's more complicated, but the PCs are basically an alliance of right-wing liberals and the conservatives to oppose the NDP. And so in an alternative universe where, say, Jack Layton formed, or Tom Mulcair formed a government in 2015, it might have been the case that the Liberal Party would have started to collapse to try to join into the Conservative Party, right? That could have happened because at the end of the day, the Conservatives and Liberals, there are differences between them, but those differences are family squabbles, whereas the fight with the NDP is an actual ideological disagreement. Sev asks if the debate is on YouTube. If anybody wants to know if it's on CPAC's channel, I don't know, but CPAC has it on their website. Maybe it's on their channel though too. Zachary asks if the PPC would become like the AFD in Germany. I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. It depends on how our system is structured. I wouldn't want to make that prediction. Yeah, the PPC under a proportional system would likely be getting more votes right now. They would be. That sucks, but it would be democratic, right? Like, look, as bad as it is, I've seen some polls in Britain that show the Brexit party at like 18% getting like 2 seats or 1 seat or 0 seats. Like, that's not fair. Like, democracy isn't just for people we agree with. And if the PPC could get more votes, they could get more votes. But I don't know if they could become like the AFD or not. I don't know how popular they would be. And I don't know if their ideology, when actually given positions of power and prominence, how the PPC ideology would actually unfold. If Canadians would want AFD style far right nationalism, or if it would manifest differently in Canada. We have different histories and whatnot. Drew, I think that there are some position changes. I think on the autonomy for resource development, I think that was a misinterpretation in part by Vashi Capellos. Not a disingenuous one. I think that was a miscommunication. I mean, on LNG, Jagmeet has taken a different position. I don't know if I find them concerning. I think he's learning in his role, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. On many of those issues, I think he's taken the right position eventually. And I think that's important. In terms of provincial vetoes, I'm not sure. I think Singh's answer, which is that we have to take into consideration the role of the plight of the provinces and the people in them more so, is I think a reasonable one. But I don't know if that was the correct interpretation. So I'm just going to take a few more questions, guys, because it is about midnight. Do have to get to bed soon. So I'm just going to kind of go through the list. And when I get to if you have a question, just throw it in right now. And then I'm going to try to keep going through here. DAB, you have to go. Thanks for coming by. Alibi asks, is like, why does it always feel like I'm just hearing almost all the bad things in the news about the NDP? Well, I mean, because the media, if you look at the media in Canada, most of the media is owned by conservative, right-leaning forces, and even left-wing media, quote unquote, is like the Toronto Star, which is generally pro-liberal. There's no mass media in Canada that's pro-NDP, and many smaller left-wing sources either don't have resources to get high visibility, or they don't like the NDP. They're left that doesn't like the NDP, and so there's very little positive coverage on the NDP in Canada. And I'm one of the biggest sources of positive coverage is this YouTube channel, which is kind of sad because I'm just a guy in my house, right? And I'm just a guy, right? And so there's not a whole lot of coverage. During this election, though, I think we've been getting better coverage, or at least balanced coverage, and you're seeing the difference it makes when people are just allowed to see Jagmeet Singh, and he's doing a lot better. But again, I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses. I mean, I am. And I do think media bias against people like Bernie and Jagmeet and Jeremy Corbyn is bad, and we have to call it out. But it's also like the NDP needs to realize that they will never get fair media coverage, ever, 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 ever. Whether they're the centrist-leaning like NDP, like the one in Alberta, or whether they're more left-leaning versions like Gary Burrell in Nova Scotia, or even the way Jagmeet is leaning. They'll never get fair coverage no matter what. Craig asks, any thoughts on far lefties saying we need a new left party? Makes me think of the scene from The Simpsons. Can I have some more cookies? Not until you finish your Sundays. I mean, I don't think we need a new party. I think that, and I'm not unaware, and I'm not oblivious to the fact that the NDP, party structure can be used in a way to silence left wingers within the party. It's happened before. I get that. But I also know that, like, Jagmeet, like, if for instance, like, a lot of people who are on the left like Nikki Ashton, and it's like, well, Nikki only lost to Jagmeet by like 30,000 votes. Like, if like the broad anti-NDP left could have just organized 30,000 people, and there are that many people, they could have just joined the party and made Nikki leader, or they could have ran somebody to get 50,000 votes. It's like if you can't take over the NDP, especially after 2015, where memberships kind of fell and the party was clearly like in a daze, it didn't know what it was doing, frankly. Like, is Mulcair staying? Is he going? All of that. If you can't take over the NDP, then how can you expect to build a new left party? I just don't see it. It's in English Canada, the NDP is the party way forward. That's my view. In Quebec, I mean, there's Quebec Solidaire, and I support them. I'm glad to see that there's increasingly more discussion between Quebec Solidaire and the NDP. Like, for example, Amir Kader, the former leader of Quebec Solidaire, his wife is running for the NDP in this election. Like, I like to see that. But, I mean, in English Canada, the left party is the NDP. Stephen Colbert, no, that's not an issue. Don't worry about that. No, don't worry about that. Okay, so I'm just going to, if it's not in now, I'm not going to be able to take it tonight. I am going to finish up these questions, though. Yeah, did you see that on Power and Politics? Tracy Ramsey got bashed on foreign policy over Trump impeachment in Venezuela. I mean, yeah, Tracy Ramsey's a real superstar, and she's got a tough profile. I think our position on Venezuela is probably not strong enough. Like, I think we should be more critical. We don't have to support Maduro. I know some people do, some people don't, but we have to be very critical of the rebels. I don't think they have legitimacy personally, and I think it's really ugly that we're siding with Brazil, especially on this. And I think that we're right to call out Trump's impeachment. I think we're 100% right to do it. Trump's a crook. He's a criminal. He deserves to be impeached. And like like people are like, well, you can't stand up to Trump. And it's like, well, look, I don't want my prime minister to lie to people. Any reasonable person thinks that man should be impeached. And if Trudeau's not saying it, he's either lying to people or he thinks Trump's a good president. And I don't know which one is worse, if I'm being honest. Yeah, I think Tracy Ramsey's done a good job. The Liberals are saying that, like, oh, we want to spit on their good NAFTA deal, but their NAFTA deal sucks. And so it's like, no, we do need a better deal. And I know that when President Sanders and Prime Minister Singh meet together, then we'll be able to achieve a lot of great things. Okay, so guys, I'm going to wrap up. This has been fantastic. Again, it was a great turnout. We have 80 people here still. Fantastic. The highest number of like consistent supporters. And for those who didn't see it, we did for the first time ever hit 100 people. Fantastic to see. I'm really, really grateful that you guys all came by. Watching this content, sharing this content, telling your friends about it. It's the best way you can help the channel grow. Again, as a reminder, I do these every Wednesday night, usually at 8 p.m. to about 10:30. But tonight I did them later because of the debate. We do them every week until the end of the election, where I might go back to a once every 2 week schedule, but I'm not sure yet. I think I'm probably going to stay weekly because the turnout here is really great. Although once the election's over, we might talk more U.S. politics. We might talk different things. But on the whole, this has been really fantastic. Any other questions you guys have, save them for next time. You can reach out to me on social media. I really appreciate it. Todd, thanks so much for the donation. I very much appreciate that. Again, you guys can support the channel. The biggest way, again, and I know not everyone has financial means, the biggest way you can support me, liking and sharing the content. All of those algorithmic things that YouTube likes to see. Share it on Reddit. I share a lot of the stuff on Reddit, But if you share it on Reddit and Twitter and Facebook, that helps. If you don't, things like that. And I have a Patreon, of course. But again, the biggest thing is you guys just coming by every week, sharing your time with me. I really appreciate it. So, guys, I'm going to see you next time. Have a great one. And I'll see you next week. But of course, check out my channel. I post a video pretty much every day. Have a good one, guys.